All right, it looks like we've got a good number of people with us at this point, so welcome. Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Egan. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the national lead of Episodic Disabilities at Realize. It is my absolute honor to welcome you to this event, our webinar on Realize as a leader in the episodic disabilities movement. We are going to be exploring a little bit today. We're going to be hearing about Realize and our history. This is the first in our speaker series that is celebrating our 25th anniversary in 2023. It's also the very first annual Episodic Disabilities Awareness Month. And through the month, we will be shining a light on individuals with episodic disabilities. We will be exploring episodic disabilities as it relates to work and employment, and as it relates to life and the way that we are navigating spaces throughout all of our different ways we engage with the world. If you are interested in celebrating along with us, please have a look at our social media platforms. We are on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter. There are a bunch of videos and a whole bunch of stuff for you to have a look at. So we look forward to you enjoying some of the content that we're putting out and engaging with us over there. So what we are trying to do with the 25th anniversary, as well as Episodic Disabilities Awareness Month and this event, are about exploring and discovering the strengths and abilities of people living with episodic disabilities through the sharing of narratives, insights, resources. We will be hosting a speakers series related to Realize and our stories once a month until the end of the year. So we hope that you will join us for those 25th anniversary webinars as well. To get things started in a good way, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that the land where the Realize office sits is on the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I am a white settler, and I would like to affirm that colonialism and the attitudes and practices that have accompanied it contribute to systemic discrimination and violence against Indigenous people across Turtle Island. And part of reconciliation is supporting decolonization, through naming injustice and through advocating for systemic change. I am always grateful for the teachings and knowledge that has been shared with me by Indigenous people, and stand firm in my ongoing commitment to creating equity and inclusion through the recognition and rights of respect, cooperation, and partnership. Thank you for being here with us. We are in Zoom webinar mode right now, and this means that English and French interpretation are available through the interpretation icon at the bottom of the Zoom window. There's a little globe there. Click on that. The links for CART will be pasted into the chat. If you do encounter any difficulties, please have a look through the participants and other panelists, and you will find Janet London, who may be able to support you with those things. All right, let's get going. We have some amazing speakers and guests with us today. What I would like to do is introduce you to our panelists. We will be hearing from Kelly O'Brien, from Wendy Porch, and from Tammy Yates Rajaduri. I'm going to ask each speaker the same question, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about your experiences through the years. So to get us started, I'm going to introduce you to Kelly O'Brien, who is an associate professor in the Department of Physical Therapy at the University of Toronto. She is also the co-director of the Rehabilitation Science Research Network for COVID. Kelly is a physical therapist and clinical epidemiologist who holds a Canada Research Chair in Episodic Disability and Rehabilitation. Kelly has a long-standing association with Realize, and so is our first speaker. And for Kelly, my question is, reflecting on your time working on episodic disabilities at Realize, or QIGR, as it was once known, what do you feel was your greatest impact?
Thanks very much, Melissa, to Realize and the team for the invitation to be involved in this celebration and milestone of Realize. My interaction with episodic disability and Realize, and prior to that, the Canadian Working Group on HIV and Rehabilitation, or QIGR, really goes back to the concept of episodic disability that was coined by QIGR in the late 1990s, that was led by the founding executive director, Elise Zak, and an esteemed inaugural board at the time. I had the opportunity to involve and further investigate the concept of episodic disability and the experiences of episodic disability from the perspectives of adults living with HIV as part of my graduate study training at the University of Toronto. And this led to the development of the episodic disability framework. This was derived from the perspectives of persons living with HIV as a way to conceptualize, define, and describe the health-related challenges experienced by adults living with HIV. It articulated a multidimensional concept of disability that could be experienced as episodic in nature, consisting of 6 dimensions, spanning physical health challenges, cognitive health challenges, mental and emotional health challenges, which could lead to difficulties carrying out day-to-day activities, challenges to social inclusion, and a 6th dimension, which was quite novel at the time, called uncertainty and worrying about the future. This was a time where aging with HIV was a newly emerging concept at the time, and so uncertainty emerged as a key dimension of disability as part of this framework. This framework also recognizes the contextual factors that could exacerbate or alleviate different dimensions of disability, including extrinsic factors such as stigma, practical and social and emotional support, and that includes through programs and policies, of which Realize has been a leader in the field. There are also intrinsic contextual factors such as aging and other concurrent health conditions that individuals may live with that could exacerbate elements of disability over time. And then the third component of this framework was recognizing the triggers that may mark a momentous event that exacerbates an episode. So these experiences were characterized by a range of health-related challenges that could result in short or long-term fluctuations of health, some of which may be unpredictable in nature and potentially impacting the ability for one to plan for the future. I think a key point to highlight is that the concept of episodic disability and what Realize and QIGR was so instrumental in highlighting that disability is not an all or nothing concept. It's not complete wellness nor complete illness, rather a continual state of health challenges with changing presence, severity, and durations of episodes over time. It's a continuum spanning over the long term, where fluctuations can occur on a weekly or daily basis, or even within the course of the day. This framework and Realize's work has been instrumental because this framework and this concept of episodic disability goes beyond other disablement frameworks that had been established prior to this time. In 2 key ways, it highlights the fluctuating nature of disability and that temporal component, and also this important key dimension of uncertainty and potentially worrying about the future. Through this work, Realize has been instrumental in highlighting the need for and access to rehabilitation services in order to address and mitigate and prevent episodic disability for persons living with HIV across Canada. It has been critical for carving a path, particularly when it comes to programs and policy surrounding labor force participation and income support. And this has been instrumental to the work around the Episodic Disability Network of Realize. It's been a privilege to be able to investigate this concept of episodic disability, going on now 20 years since the inception of QIGR in 1998. And I continue to welcome the opportunity and the collaborations and partnerships that have been established through the work and leadership of Realize and QIGR across Canada and internationally.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Your research, your work is so woven through the fabric of Realize and our history and the work that we continue to do. I am so happy that you're here with us today and just thrilled with the opportunity to continue to work alongside you and to learn from the things that you're doing and to be able to incorporate them into the work that I do. So thank you. Thank you for your comments and your insights. We'll be right back to you. Just give me a second. Over to Wendy. Wendy Porch is the Executive Director of the Centre for Independent Living in Toronto, or called CILT. She has been working in the field of accessibility, disability, human rights, and education for more than 20 years and is a lifelong disability justice advocate. Before joining CILT, Wendy was the manager of episodic disabilities initiatives at Realize, and I am thrilled to have you here. So the same question, Wendy, reflecting on your time working on episodic disabilities at Realize and QIGR, what do you feel was your greatest impact?
Thank you, Melissa. And it is really great to be here and to talk about this. We don't get to, in this sector of social services and disability organizations, we don't often get to just stand back and look at something and say, hey, we did good. We've done some good here. So I'm really thrilled to be here. Your question is a really good one, Melissa, and it's a hard one because measuring impact is difficult in our work. It's hard to say what ripples out from the work that we do, who it touches, and what changes it might make. But I think it's fair to say that there can be individual impact and systemic impact. And I think that the idea of episodic disability and the work that has come out of QIGR and out of Realize on this topic has both of those elements. So I can speak to some individual impact. So for me, I still remember the day that I went to Realize's offices, which were QIGR's offices at the time, for a job interview. I had moved back from living in London in the UK to Toronto, and I was looking to be engaged in work related to disability because that's what I have always done. I am a person with a disability myself too, and I had been a researcher in accessibility. And I went to this interview with Martine Mangeon. I don't know, Kelly, if you remember Martine. She was doing this work before I got there. And we had a great chat, and she explained to me, she actually asked me, have you ever heard of episodic disability? And I said, no. And she explained to me this concept, this conceptualization of periods of time of being impacted and sort of more symptomatic disability, and that fluctuated in periods of time where people were less impacted, and that it could be quite unpredictable. And I thought, hang on a minute, I've been around for a while. and I have never heard of this. How have I missed this? And I really thought about it. And I remember I went home and I Googled everything I could. But it was an aha moment for me. And this is something that I think I have seen consistently throughout my work at both Quigger and Realize related to episodic disability, is that when we talk about it, there is a kind of, yeah, that makes total sense that happens for people, because disability is not binary. It is not off on. For many people, it is this continual, unpredictable process of some days being maybe more impacted and other days being less impacted. So I had that moment. I have seen that moment for many people in the work that I was doing at Realize. And I know, Melissa, you can speak to this too, especially for people. I know that the work came out of, Kelly, your work with people living with HIV, and also for people living with multiple sclerosis, and also for people living with mental health conditions, and also for people living with arthritis. And the list goes on of people who, until they encountered this conceptualization, didn't have a way to describe their lives. They knew that they were living this. There was no language for it. And I think that that has had a profound impact on individuals, that they feel that they can see themselves and their experience reflected, where before this discussion, it was very liminal. It was not seen. There were no words to describe this. And I think that is profound. That is a profound impact. And I have seen it on people that I've been lucky enough to meet through this work. I think, in terms of systemic impact, there has also been work that Realize has led that has changed the landscape of disability in Canada and how we think about it. Some of the work that I was lucky enough to be involved in related to the development of the definition of disability for the Accessible Canada Act. So the federal legislation that says this is what a disability is, and that is developing standards for how do we engage with and support and accommodate and include disabled people, says episodic disability in it. Disability can be episodic. And I remember, and please let me know if I'm going over here in terms of time, but I remember very clearly in the consultations leading up to the Accessible Canada Act, talking to members of the EDF, the Accessible Episodic Disability Forum. I have an ATF, so I'm getting confused. Episodic Disability Forum, about how are we going to make sure that this definition was in there and how important and significant it would be. I went to one of the consultations here in Toronto, and there were at least 100 people speaking at the consultation, and the numbers that were given out for speaking order were random. And so I was waiting for my turn, and just ahead of me, Laverne Jacobs, Dr. Laverne Jacobs at the University of Windsor, who's a law professor, and with whom we've done significant work around episodic disability, stood up and said, it must include episodic disability for all of these reasons. And it was brilliant. I happened to be speaking just after Laverne, and my prepared notes were very similar to hers. And I said all of the things and sat down. And then two people after me, Benjamin Davis from the MS Society, stood up and said all of the same things. And so without planning it, the three of us within 10 minutes of each other had all repeated the reasons why it was important for this new definition to break ground and include episodic disability. And the fact that that happened had a huge impact. It's in there. It means that moving forward, it's part of this formal conceptualization of episodic disability. And I think that was really significant.
It sure was. It's now part of Canadian law. That's extraordinary. And it's the thing that I always tell people, right? We know the Margaret Mead quote that, never before, a small group of people can have a huge impact as long as they actually do the thing. And I often tell people that when I do the education that I do and say, this might feel like an insurmountable thing, that there's no way you can change your workplace policy. And I always say, yeah, sure you can. We changed Canadian law. We added language into that. A tiny organization, fewer than 10 people, came together with so many other organizations and said, this has to change. So thank you, Wendy, for telling us that story, for being a part of Realize's fabric, for making sure that your light is part of everything that we do going forward alongside Kelly's light as well. So our last speaker for this question is going to be our fearless leader, Tammy Yates Rajadure, is the executive director of Realize. And prior to joining us, Tammy was a national program manager for the United Nations Population Fund's Trinidad and Tobago branch office. She also has extensive experience in gender and development, sexual and reproductive health, including HIV and AIDS, and also worked as a program officer with the Secretariat of the Caribbean Regional Network of Persons Living with HIV. So Tammy, you've been at Realize for quite a few years now, which is probably a surprise every time you think about it. The days are long, but the years are short. So reflecting on your time with working in episodic disabilities and with Realize and Quigger, what do you feel has been your greatest impact so far?
Thank you so much, Melissa. And I have absolute goosebumps just being in the presence of all of you and of all of the participants. And fearless, I think not. I walk and wade through my fear on a daily basis. So, so making friends with fear, maybe that sounds more like me. But I do, want to reiterate, and I'm looking down because I have so many notes. So forgive me if I'm looking down and up, to reiterate that I fully acknowledge all of the amazing shoulders that I have worked on, that have led us to this point. And that we've all, passed the baton in some form or fashion. So, Elise, Stephanie Nixon, Francisco, Paul Kerwin, I can, Melissa Popiel, who also passed the baton to me, Eileen McKee, who could not be here and who also passed the baton to me. And Wendy, I have to thank you for having Jasper, because when I moved from Trinidad and Tobago in 2012, and I saw the ad for this maternity leave, a one-year maternity leave position at this organization called the Canadian Working Group on HIV and Rehabilitation. And it was for the position of the episodic disabilities lead at that time, because Wendy was at home taking care of Jasper. I also had never heard of this concept of episodic disabilities and this HIV organization doing work on episodic disabilities. It was very intriguing. And of course, so I have 25 points that I'd like to raise. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. I'm joking. I do have 5 points that I'd like to raise. So I was going to say the 25 in terms of our 25th anniversary, but I'll bucket them into 5 buckets of 5. And 3 of them would be sort of organizational impacts and 2 personal. And Melissa, it's interesting when you sent the questions to us, um, I looked at it and I said, what was your greatest impact? And I thought to myself, I'm still here. So, so I looked at it as at that time when my chapter ends at Realize, or the legacy that I would have liked people to say that I've left at Realize. So these are sort of the 5 buckets that I'll refer to. And the first is um, moving from the Canadian Working Group on HIV and rehabilitation to Realize. So moving from QUIGA, that whole rebranding exercise to Realize. And I am not going to pretend as if it was done on my own. It was the entire team, the board, and even more so, Stephen Tattle, who also handed over the baton to me, because that's also an interesting story. Because my relatives who often visit in summer have said to me, the first summer they visited, I was the lead of Episodic Disabilities. The second summer they visited, Wendy had returned and, of course, came back to her position. And I was then the manager of programs and communications. And then by the third summer they visited, I was the executive director. So I said, okay, every time that you come to Realize I have a different job title, clearly you realize, pun intended, that the next time I change jobs, it would be moving out of Realize because I have nowhere else to go at this point after the executive director. So I would also be handing over the baton to another great person to fill the shoes of Elise Zach, and then the contribution that I would have made to the organization. So I go back to moving from QUIGA to Realize, and the angst, the discomfort in the spaces that we inhabit, and the challenge of understanding that as an organization, while we always have and always will center the lived experience of HIV within the organization, the journey of HIV had changed, and who we are at Realize and what we were doing had also changed to mirror that journey. So when we rebranded in September 2016, I think it was a phenomenal moment within the life of the organization, because not only did it shine the light on us as a beacon and a pioneer within the HIV movement, but it solidified us as a beacon and a pioneer within the disability movement here in Canada. So that's number 1, organizationally. Number 2, I'm going to frame this as sort of from uncertainty, and not the type of uncertainty that Kelly referred to, but uncertainty to belonging in the national disability movement. I know that many of those who were in the position of episodic disabilities lead prior to me taking the baton. So Martine, Eileen, Melissa, Wendy, you would have all gone through the need of having to explain in the HIV movement the concept and the understanding of episodic disability within our HIV world. And then in our disability world, we would have to defend and legitimize the making of space for our organization and our work within the disability movement. And we have come to a place after many conversations, many challenges, a lot of questions. Why are you getting funding and we're not? Why are you leading projects and we're not? To Quigger and Realize being sought as the expert and the leader on a continuous basis, and almost that a safe space of not having to legitimize the disability work in the HIV movement and the HIV work in the context of episodic disability in the disability movement. So the third point, and I know I'm probably running over time, but bear with me. My third point is we survived. It's 25 years, and it has not been an easy 25 years from a sustainability perspective, from a funding perspective. Many who are on this webinar, and of course, my fellow panelists would be aware, and Melissa, you as moderator, the ebbs and flows of funding within both the disability movement in Canada and the HIV movement in terms of sector funding. And there were several years, I know Janet often, and anyone on this webinar, when we say Janet, would know who Janet is. Janet would often say there were times when Elise and Janet would be counting down potentially how many more months we may be in existence when we were Quigger. And we went through that period when we became Realize. And we are at a point now where, we are steadily growing. We have sustained funding for the immediate projected future. But of course, we continue to look and secure operational funding so that we do not have to ride the waves of the ebbs and flows of potential funders. So the fourth point, and this is where it's becoming personal. When Wendy referred to the job interview that she had those few years ago, we're not going to call any numbers, Wendy. We're not going to age us, Kelly and Wendy, Kelly with her 20 years. We're not aging ourselves. When I started in the position as Wendy was on maternity leave, I also realized, having worked in HIV program management and communications in the Caribbean for over a decade by that point when I moved to Canada, firstly, that the people that I'd worked with lived and living experience, this concept of episodic disability described their everyday, but also the concept of episodic described my everyday and my mother's everyday. We were given language to describe what we were living every day. And that profoundly impacted me professionally and personally. So that in this position of, which I do not take for granted whatsoever, in this position of leadership within both the HIV and the disability sectors, that lived experience of someone with an episodic condition and those closest to me who live with episodic disability, I take that with me in the parliamentary committee sittings that I'm in the national ED roundtables that I'm in all of those positions where I can bring voice to this work from that perspective. And finally, As the first Black woman to lead a national organization in both the HIV and the national disability sector, I have walked every intersection that I bring with me, I bring to those tables. And I almost feel that when I pass the executive director baton on to the next person, when that time comes, no news, I'm not making any announcements, no news, but being very mindful, intentful, purposeful of bringing marginalized voices to the mainstream in episodic disabilities and in the HIV movement. I feel and I hope that one day might be looked upon as probably the biggest legacy that I leave.
Thank you, Tammy. It's always incredible to hear your story and to listen to the way that the organization has fostered leadership and really created connections between the things that you've experienced in your life, as well as some of your professional experiences, to create this organization that I am very proud to be a part of, and that I am so excited to see where it goes in the future. The growth that we've experienced over the last little while has been something I never expected. And it is through the creativity and the dedication and the focus that you have brought to our funding proposals and to our relationship building that has made that growth possible. So yeah, it's a really neat time to be a part of this organization. So let's keep going, because I still want to hear about the future. And I'm going to turn back to you, Kelly. Finally, back to you. What are your hopes for the future of this organization?
Thanks, Melissa. It's so great to listen to Wendy and Tammy's comments about sort of the history over time. And I think when it comes to the future, I see an important and critical role for Realize more than ever as a champion in the context of episodic disability, social participation, inclusion, and engagement. In not only the fields of program and policy work, but education, knowledge transfer and exchange, and of course, research. This is, I think back to really building again on the legacy of Elise Sack and how many years ago she saw the importance of a strengthened numbers approach and thinking beyond a siloed context of HIV only, but the importance of bridging partnerships and collaborations with other chronic and episodic conditions. And my most recent experience in the last couple of years collaborating in the context of long COVID has really highlighted for me the foundational piece that Quigger and Realize has established, and how it was so ahead of its time. The HIV community as a whole was ahead of its time. I think it's now more important than ever for Realize to really be leaders in this field, because Realize has been doing this collaborative work for so long, recognizing the importance of considering episodic disability as a multidimensional concept that may be experienced as episodic and uncertain, recognizing that rehabilitation has a key role in addressing and preventing disability. And I think making further headway in promoting equitable, timely, and appropriate access to rehabilitation services for people living with HIV and other chronic and episodic conditions in Canada. I think building, continuing for Realize to build on existing networks in HIV rehabilitation and episodic disability will be key for providing foundations for developing the field moving forward. And the last point I'll make, and again, I am incredibly humbled, as I said, now that I'm collaborating in other realms, most recently in the context of long COVID, I am reminded how the HIV community was instrumental in championing and carving a path in leadership in episodic disability rehabilitation and community-led and community-engaged research, policy, education, and practice. This is something that I am struck is new to some researchers, educators, and I think it's again reminded again how just how instrumental and how the HIV community and Realize has championed this field moving forward. And I feel very privileged to be able to take the lessons learned that I have learned within the context of Quigger, Realize, and many individuals living with HIV who are on this call, and I've had the opportunity to collaborate with over the years, and taking that and translating it to other contexts, as in the context of research specifically. So I will leave things there. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Those are incredible wishes for us. I hope that we also continue to do this work, and that we can continue to work alongside you. Okay, Wendy, over to you. What are your hopes for the future of Realize?
I mean, you know, the questions were really simple questions you were asking, right? A very straightforward question. They are simple. They are complex. My hopes for Realize, they are big. They are small. You know, they're everything. I hope that the work continues to expand and grow. Knowledge of episodic disability, and that it gains the broader understanding within Canada and within an international context that it deserves. It means then that the lived experiences of so many people will be formally factored into the sets of policies around disability that impact their lives. And that hasn't happened fully yet in Canada or internationally in the way that it should. There is still a lot of work to be done, in fact, I think, on that front. I hope that work to understand the lived experience of episodic disability continues. So research that Kelly pioneered, and that folks like, I think, Julie Kellendorfer from the MS Society might be on the call here. Julie has done quite a lot of work around this too. Melissa Popiel, Adele Fury, John Stapleton. These are some of the researchers that we've worked with to really look at what are the day-to-day experiences and the broader experiences of people living with episodic disabilities. I think it's really significant that I wanted to say this in the impact bit, but I was talking too much. So we did work as a group with the Canada Survey on Disability, which is the federal survey that comes out, I think it's every 4 years, to assess where people with disabilities sit in terms of a number of metrics. And we worked with the federal government to consider and understand how episodic disability could be placed within that survey. And the first time that was done, the numbers that came back actually suggested that the numbers of people living with episodic disabilities were greater than the numbers of people who reported having relatively stable disabilities. And that, I remember, Tammy, you and I jumping up and down in the office, that was an incredible finding. And we still need to celebrate that that happened in the first place, that we made this structural change, but we need to understand more. And so I hope to see that this work in understanding what episodic disability looks like when it comes up against structures that are not built to understand this way of looking at disability and the changes that need to be made. I hope that we continue to see Realize do that important work. I now sit in meetings where people self-identify as living with an episodic disability. And I always get kind of goosebumps when that happens. It doesn't always happen, but it happens quite a lot. And I think that is so significant. And within the context of my organization, the Center for Independent Living in Toronto, all of my staff have received training in understanding episodic disability and in working towards integrating that into our way of thinking and working around disability. And I hope that that continues, that work continues. And I agree with Kelly that partnership is the way to do this work, that reaching out to organizations to talk about this, to understand people's experiences and shared challenges is the way to go. And I hope for that work to continue. I know, Melissa, you do a lot of that work now in partnership with the Episodic Disability Forum folks. And I know that you're doing great work in that regard. So I hope that that continues. Sometimes it feels a bit like we talk to ourselves. You know, we're all great friends sometimes, but I think, you know, that continues to grow. That group of people continues to grow. And when that continues to grow, the opportunity for those significant structural changes to be made continues. And I think that is my hope, that the work continues and that we continue to have leadership within the movement of people with lived experience, you know, and that particularly racialized folks with episodic disabilities, Indigenous folks with episodic disabilities, newcomer folks with episodic disabilities, you know, reaching out to make sure that we have those connections and those partnerships is significant, because this changes people's lives. This conceptualization of disability changes people's sense of belonging and of what's possible. And so I hope that all of that work continues, and I know it will.
Thank you, Wendy. And you're right, it will continue. This isn't going anywhere. We're not going anywhere. And I do want to just highlight Paul Kerwin's comment in the chat here, because he has been involved on the Realize board for more than at least 8 years. That's what I know about, at least 8 years, if not longer. And he's really highlighted some of his own personal experiences and the significance of his relationship with Realize and how it's impacted his life. So thank you, Paul, for being involved and for being such an extraordinary advocate and supporter of Realize, and for being a co-chair of our board. Our success is in part because of you. So thank you for all of that. Lastly, I'm going to pass it over to Tammy to kind of wrap things up for us a little bit for the next 5 to 7 minutes or so. Tell us, what are your hopes? What are your visions, dreams of the future for Realize under your leadership?
Thanks so much, Melissa. And I too want to acknowledge Paul, of course, who's now become such a dear friend. I don't even want to think about him leaving the board, but that's for another webinar. I also want to acknowledge my sister, Lisa, who is the chair of Ashe Community Foundation for Black Canadians with Disabilities. And Lisa and I now form quite an awesome duo when we sit at those national roundtables. So in terms of the 5 points that I have in terms of the future of Realize. They could be 25, but I'll make it 5. I'm going to sort of piggyback on Wendy, something that you shared in terms of the continued national growth and leadership for Realize in the context of episodic disabilities. And again, always centering our work with people living with HIV and other episodic disabilities in 3 ways around that national work. From a policy perspective, the first is the Canada Disability Benefit. We have also, over the last few years, been very involved in submissions and so on, because the harmonization of the definition of disability is something that we've also been working on for so many years. And while the Accessible Canada Act has adopted, and Wendy, we remember jumping up in the office like, yahoo, that when that happened, we now have the Canada Disability Benefit coming up. And the regulations and the consultations surrounding that. So everyone who's on the webinar, please, if you participate, and we're going to have a clarion call out maybe to the members of the EDF, like our organizational sister colleagues at MS Society, Arthritis, and the list goes on, around ensuring that the definition used and considerations that go into the Canada Disability Benefit regulations consider episodic disability, because we know that often in all jurisdictional regulations and policies, whereas in Ontario, for example, we have legislation that also includes episodic disability, the implementation and the regulations are not as effective. So let's ensure that we have that. The second is around the accessibility standards for employment that are coming up under the Canada Accessibility Standards. I'm messing up the name, ACS, the Accessibility Canada Standards, or Accessibility Standards Canada. You get the point. The federal body, the Crown Corporation responsible for developing and implementing standards across the country. Employment standards are in the pipeline, and hopefully we'll be working with them pretty soon to ensure that episodic disabilities is mainstreamed throughout that. And then finally, something you touched on, Wendy, with the Canadian Survey on Disability, the work that we started with them on just a very small episodic disability module has mushroomed into a huge and very robust. So over the years, we've worked very closely with them, and even up to very recently. And we are anticipating very rich data coming out in this module at the end of December into January, as confirmed by StatsCan. So Kelly, potentially, and our community researchers and any other researchers who are on the webinar and who we partner with, there's going to be rich data for us to work with from an evidence-based perspective, which often is what policymakers and program decisions say they're lacking to ensure that episodic disabilities is included. In the future, they're not going to be able to say that because we've worked long and hard to get there, and we're almost there. So the second thing is around not just national growth, but that global growth that you mentioned, Wendy. The challenge always is being invited to do the work, wanting to do the work, and the capacity to do the work, because being a pioneer, being a center of excellence, being a knowledge hub, everyone wants to work with us on this, and we often want to work with everyone on it. But our capacity, we often have to make very strategic decisions. And in the future, I think we definitely want to, as Kelly mentioned, the issue of long COVID, the global impact that that has had. And so over the years, we've done some phenomenal work, both globally in the HIV context, but also in the episodic disability context. Patty Solomon, Stephanie Nixon, Darren Brown in the UK, and so Helen, and so many names to mention. But we do want to expand on that global uh, sharing and awareness of episodic disabilities, because we know that it's not just people in Canada that have this experience. So we want to also give our global brothers and sisters and siblings tools and language and resources. So very quickly, 3, 4, and 5. 3, deeper growth with our partnership organizations to continue to bring marginalized lived and living experience and voices to the mainstream. We're doing some exceedingly exciting work now. Not that we don't always do exciting work, but really exciting work with some organizational partners who've done focus groups around what a principle we've developed internally called the ideal principle, and that's inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility leading to belonging. And we see those ideal principles really causing a paradigm shift within the national disability movement, and hopefully, again, bringing the traditionally marginalized voices to the center. And then finally, sustainability for Realize going forward. We have it now. We want to envision that even greater in the future. And when I talk sustainability, I am not just talking about funding. Yes, funding is always critical, but Realize is only as good as the people, what we often call in the past, the Quigger vortex. We've adopted the Realize vortex, and those people are our phenomenal board, our wonderful members, the amazing staff that I'm lucky enough to work with on a daily basis, and all of the partners and volunteers, whether academic partners, corporate partners, federal, provincial, municipal partners. I mean, the list goes on. So that we will not, as we project ourselves, we will not reach our goal if we do not focus on the Realize vortex and our people. And one of those people I want to highlight, Melissa, is you, because we've all passed the baton to you. And I want to let you know that you are a champion. The amazing work that you do and what you've brought to episodic disability, I know, is part of the legacy that you are going to leave when you pass the baton on, when you rise in the ranks in the organization as well. So I think that's it for me. I don't know if we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions or comments.
I don't know if we do either. One of our speakers has a pretty hard stop. Wendy has to go. So yeah, I just want to say these are incredibly powerful stories from incredibly powerful and amazing people who have done wonderful work with Realize and continue to do wonderful work through their careers. And I really look forward to what we can do together as we continue to collaborate and as we continue to be champions moving forward. When we acknowledge the significance of a small organization like Realize, working at the intersections of episodic disability and HIV for 25 years, it becomes really clear that it is people. It is the stories that people carry that have built this foundation, this strength that has grown into such a positive and powerful force for change. So thank you to everyone for being here, for sharing your stories. Thank you to Kelly and to Wendy and to Tammy. Thank you to our interpreters so much for being here, to everybody who has done translation and interpretation on this webinar. We are grateful, amazing work as always. Yeah, and thank you to the Realize team who have put this together. The events unfold smoothly because of the work that is done behind the scenes. It takes a village. So we are a vortex, we are a village, we are simply people who carry stories. So thank you all for being a part of this. Thank you, Tammy, Kelly, Wendy, much appreciated. Have a wonderful afternoon all. Bye.